Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis. This is the after action report of the first debate of the Lyceum debates. And we just finished the debate with the debate on private property, whether it's feasible or not. And yeah, so I think let me ask you this, Mathoma first. What do you think of your performance in the debate? And then I'll ask Snake what he thought of his performance.
Well, I think I did get hung up on a little bit of a terminological squabble there at the end as to what the resolution debate entails, whether it's feasible in the sense that we want a long-term system where private property is abolished, or simply some transitory state where private property is absent for a short period of time, but is inevitably going to show up again. So at that point, I got a little bit derailed on. He also got me on the distinction between theory and practice. I mean, because he immediately said that if you don't have enforceable property rights, then you may as well not have them at all. Whereas I was under the impression that property relations are not. There's something in addition to what gets enforced. They're at least according to the Marxist theory, they're social relations between how people use certain items, and I think mainly those 2 points I got caught up on.
Okay. So Snake, what do you think of? How would you judge your performance of the debate?
I mean, I would have to listen to the debate again to really know for sure. But right now, having just had the debate, I feel like I did, fairly well. I think, on the concept of abstract property versus in practice, I was able to use that somewhat to my advantage, though I will say, Mathoma, I was not expecting you to go down the route of sustainability being, something tied to feasibility, and that did throw me off. I was trying to figure out how to really respond in a way that was convincing, so props to you.
Okay, so I want to give sort of my 2 cents on it first. What I really liked about your angle, Mathoma, was I wasn't clear which way you were going to go at first, because I hadn't seen you debate before. But basically what you did, and it was, I think, your strongest point, was when you latched on to the fact of feasibility in the long term. Because I think, what does the word feasibility mean? If we say a platform is politically feasible, what does that mean? Well, it has to last for some determinate amount of time. But I think that was your strongest point. But I think one weak point, though, was when you brought up that, all the social systems have failed as of yet now. That's true. But so have all feudal systems, so have all most monarchies. So, I mean, feasibility is temporally dependent. I think that was probably your strongest point, because you did point out to Snake that, well, how would you keep it feasible or maintained for any length of time? Though I think you might have overplayed your hand when you said, well, only 60 years. I mean, Alexander the Great's empire didn't last very long, but it's feasible he could have built such an empire and that he could have ruled it. He just seemed to die prematurely. So, but basically what you did was, the word itself, I guess there's certain even ambiguities in the word that I picked. I thought it was a fairly clear word. But you were within the realm of the debate, arguing for something that Snake wasn't necessarily prepared for, based on the ambiguity of the term, which I think was a good point. Now Snake, the point that you did was, I think that the good stuff you did was when you defined private and public property fairly well. I think most socialists or Marxists would be happy with that definition. The other thing is, I think maybe you should, when Mathoma brought up the fact that sustainable in over a period of time. See, the period of time is interesting, because your comeback, Snake, was, well, everything ends at a certain amount of time. So how much time is feasible? So I think that was, but also not giving an account of how it could be feasible over 10, 15, or 20 years was maybe one of the weak points, because I think Mathoma was within the rights of the debate to explore the meaning of the term feasible in that way. The question then becomes, how long of a length of time does have to elapse before it's feasible? I mean, if it fails on start, well then no, it's not feasible. But if it lasts 60, 100, 200 years and still collapses, I mean, United States will collapse at some point as well. So, is it feasible for
collapse eventually?
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, there's a kind of a double-edged sword here with the temporality argument, because on the one hand, you can't rule it out entirely, because if you fail on start, it's a non-starter. But everything fails in the long run. So I would say that that's a little weaker. I also think that Snake, you could have offered. I think another good point Mathoma made was when he said, "How might you go about creating this revolution, both either a state down revolution or a bottom up libertarian revolution?" I think that's within the realm of possible and feasible as well. I think that was within the terms of the debate. I think in a lot of respects, I was expecting maybe Mathoma to just argue that, communism's evil or capitalism is good and makes money. But no, he didn't really go for that. I think he tried to stay within the terms of the debate, but this is where we get into arguing about words. As far as the actual scope of the debate. So as far as scope goes, I think we should, to quote Pirates of the Caribbean, they're guidelines. The Pirates Code is guidelines. It's not like an ironclad, thou shalt not do this. It's more like guidelines. So it is, as long as you can argue conceivably well that it's within the guidelines of the terminology, we should probably accept that, giving the sort of the pirate code spin that we get from Pirates of the Caribbean. Because on the one hand, if it's too broad, then we're just talking past each other and going nowhere. And if it's too narrow, it can get kind of pedantic. So I think some and part of that is a personal judgment call on the interlocutors. It kind of just depends on that. Now we have a bunch of people here who actually watched the entirety or most of the debate. Inarco, did you watch the debate?
Not myself, no. I'm kind of.
I did not either. I'm trying.
Wait, there was a debate?
Yeah, this is an AAR to the debate.
Yeah, no, I was kidding, dude.
After action report. Yeah, I should have known.
So did you watch it?
I did not watch the debate.
Oh, only a little bit of it in the middle.
I'm going
I don't
to
know the end of the conclusion.
I'm going to go back to the Discord. Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
But yeah, let's see. So one of the other things is it would be interesting. So for instance, when Mathoma asked you, Snake, how would the working class be motivated or led to this point? I mean, it wouldn't be feasible immediately, obviously. But again, feasibility doesn't have to be immediate. I mean, right? The foundations for the Bolshevik Party took decades to lay. So in 1880, it was not feasible immediately to overthrow the Tsar, but 35 years later, it became a lot more feasible. But giving an account of how one could build a foundation for a workers' movement that could galvanize enough of the workers to do that, I think maybe would have made your argument a little bit stronger. So I'm going to ask you this first, Mathoma. So given the sort of constructive criticism that I've given, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, during the debate, I wasn't sure how much to press that issue of feasibility, because if we had before the debate agreed that for any given amount of time, there could be no enforceable private property rights. I mean, I would certainly. I mean, how could you argue against that? I mean, it's certainly conceivable that the state could be overthrown, but I guess even before the debate, in my preparations, I was kind of going for that angle of whether Snake could kind of tell a story about how such a system would come about and how it would be sustained. So I mean, during the debate, I kind of realized there was an angle of the debate resolution I hadn't really thought of, that he was just going to say, okay, yeah, well, a state can be overthrown, it can be put into chaos, and in that case, the debate resolution is settled. But no,
So what do you think, Snake, of the constructive criticism?
I think you made a lot of good points. I mean, especially about sort of going into more detail about possible ways or just the general details about how that sentiment might form in, the workers or the working class. I chose to avoid that for two reasons. One, because quite frankly, I'm not, really qualified to get into a lot of those details. I don't know all of the philosophy that well. I mean, for anyone watching this, it might surprise you to learn that no, I am not in fact a Marxist or even a socialist. I mean, I got you guys. I was playing devil's advocate, though. I still believe that I'm right. I believe that it is feasible that it could happen, even if I might not advocate for that. But yeah, the other reason was because quite frankly, I think it kind of it came off the rails and went away from the actual question of the debate, and I felt like he was sort of pulling me into a fight I couldn't win, and also a fight that I didn't have to win. So I decided to just kind of be rude and just press the point and see if that would increase my chances.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, like I said, for you guys haven't really done a debate like this before, right? I think this is your first time each, right?
Right.
Not a formal debate of this nature. I have had conversations, but yes.
Yeah, cool. I think that's I think you guys did fairly well, for the first time. And again, this is the whole point of the series, is to get people to test themselves and get in the ring, kind of get learned by experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a lot of fun. I think I learned a lot by actually, sitting down to prepare for this and being in it. It was, and I think you mentioned this in the past when you were coming up with this idea to have debates of this nature. You were saying that, especially for the party or parties who are arguing a position that might not be a position they'd normally argue. I'm not a Marxist, so I wouldn't normally be in the position of arguing this. It was something that really made me sort of stretch my thinking and try to get inside the heads of maybe people I would disagree with. And I think you were right in saying that this might prepare, the person in the situation to, in the future, debate with the side that they've represented.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of gets to the key point that I wanted to get at with this particular debate here, is if you know your opponent's position better than he does. I just earlier today did a stream with not really a stream, it was an OBS recording with Moosh and Struggle on Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And if you know your enemy's positions, his own mind better than he does, you have a tremendous tactical advantage.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
And that's in part why I wanted to do it this way. That's why I have the 1 to 4 rule, right? Every 4 debates you participate in, one of them you have to at least defend a position that you don't agree with. Now, whatever that one is, I leave it up to mostly you to choose. It's not going to be any sort of a. What I think, since we've sort of talked about this debate itself, maybe we could talk a little bit about the future of what we'd like to do with these debates. One of the things I'd like to do is, if we get enough people that are interested in these kinds of debates, and we get enough people watching them, we could actually start doing like polls, like, okay, like what debate should we have next? And who should debate position X or who should debate position Y? That way they could get a little more engagement with the audience.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be, a lot of fun.
What do you think about that idea, Mathom? You think that'd be an interesting idea to try out?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I would say one point, again, I think another good point that you did bring up, Mathoma, was how would the enforcement of the abolition of private property occur? So for instance, how would, let's say you have your anarchist or Bolshevik revolution and private property is gone. How would you, again, you're using the feasibility umbrella of the scope of the debate, to how would you do that?
Is this supposed to be live?
Yeah, this is live. Yeah.
Okay.
I would say, let me give you a kind of how I think a Marxist might respond to some of these claims, and this maybe be for pointers for Snake as well.
Okay.
The way that let's go back to your first objection, Mathoma, the objection of what would you how would you how would you get people to the point where they'd be ready for a revolution, right? I mean, they're not ready now. Obviously, they're if tomorrow you could have a strike of 10 million people, probably not. What would be necessary to happen? There's usually two factors involved, right? There's of course the opportunity, right? Like in Russia in 1917, they just lost a war, or were losing a war. France in what 1789, they had bankrupted themselves in a war against the British fighting for the American Revolution. So opportunities all necessary, but of course, a shrewd planner can create his own opportunities. But this kind of you need something like you need something like a vanguard, and that's certainly a Marxist idea, where the people themselves have to be they have to be activated. You have to organize with them so that they can understand what they need to do. So you need to have people go out there. Like, for instance, right now, community organizing is a classic example. If they were to use community organizing tactics as one tactic in a suite of tactics to activate the working class, that would be one way you could get them to see their class interests, right? We're speaking from a Marxist perspective here, or anarchist perspective here. And you basically need them to see their own class interests. And the way you do that is by you mingle with them. You get involved with them. You do activism with them. That could take decades, as it did take in, like, say, Spain during the to lead up to to even have the CNT take over Barcelona. It took decades of organizing and outreach, community organizing, so to speak, of the anarchists to get that far. Now, how would you prevent people within the anarchist state from then using private property? I mean, there's a couple ways you can go about this, right? Like today in the modern West, nobody would really conceivably think of going back to slavery, like chattel slavery, or going back to feudalism. I imagine one thing a Marxist would say is, well, or socialists would say is, well, we've transcended these modes of production. We've transcended feudalism. We've transcended slavery, because people no longer believe it to be a valid system.
In the West.
What we need to do is we need to get enough people to perceive private property to be invalid in much the same way as slavery and feudalism. And the idea of it coming back would be as impossible in that society as it's impossible to imagine chattel slavery of, like, the Deep South, or feudalism of, like, medieval France coming back. That's one way. And there's various ways we've seen how those institutions historically have become seen as redundant. And then the other way you could do it is you could say that in a society where you have people that don't necessarily accept yet the illegitimacy of private property, one of the things that you could do is that you have the way they usually organize, at least from top-down socialism, what to do, you just line them up against the wall and shoot them. But for libertarian socialism, it wouldn't be quite that easy. But within the people, within the communes, within those societies, you have workers' councils, with democratic representation, and you probably have citizens' militias where the working, like in Barcelona itself, in Barcelona during the Civil War, they took over the armories and they armed themselves. And they weren't very well organized militarily, so they were easy pickings for the communist counter-revolution. But that's something that could, I think, be solved. I mean, if you had sort of if those people had been better trained, like, say, the Boers or the even American militia of today, the militia movement, they might have been able to put up more of a sustained resistance. But I think these are just some ways in which a Marxist or a socialist might have answered Mathoma's questions. So, Mathoma, do you think if those had been brought up, how would you have responded to those objections if they had been brought up in the debate?
Yeah, actually, in my debate preparation, I was expecting Snake to kind of go down one of those possible avenues that, in the Soviet Union, there was a background of the First World War. I mean, who was Nicholas II? There was a sort of resentment against him. That's one thing that kind of fueled the what eventually transpired, right? So I was expecting Snake to say something like, okay, we're going to instigate some sort of war, or we're going to ask some sort of foreign nation to come in and instigate a war, and that's going to brew up some sort of resentment toward the government, and that's what's going to eventually lead us into this organic revolution, similar to the Russian Revolution. But in terms of answering those objections, I guess I would say that I would just pull it back to whether it's feasible to get this sort of foreign intervention coming in here. I mean, what is the motive for some sort of foreign intervention in getting some sort of war effort ramped up?
Well, yeah, that would maybe diffuse that particular one. But what do you think about the claim that getting a popular consciousness where private property is seen as taboo as slavery or feudalism?
Yeah, I mean,
you might say that you might say it seems a little bit crazy, but if you were to say that in 11th century France or 1st century Rome, people think you're crazy.
Yeah, I guess like if we're talking about like in the context of the United States, it seems a little bit, it seems outside the Overton window because we have experience with being anti-communist and kind of sniffing out Bolshevik policies, right? I mean, this is one thing in American politics. So a lot of things get criticized as socialistic. So it seems like something like this is going to be sniffed out immediately.
Yeah. Okay. You wanted to say something, Anarcho?
Yeah. I kind of want to push back against this Marxist narrative of slavery and feudalism just being the primary stages before capitalism. I mean, obviously, technological innovation will affect things in its own particular way, but I don't think private property is a concept that can be made as illegitimate as slavery or feudalism has become in the West. The reason being because we all agree on all that private property manifests in the capitalist system is just the ability of someone to invest their personal property, i.e., their money, into a specific operations that happens to require the voluntary collaboration of a large group of people. Now we can debate the voluntary nature, the voluntarists and anti-leftist anarchists have been going back and forth around that debate forever, but I think property in general, I guess the problem with making private property illegitimate is that it's just very hard to distinguish between the two concepts. And anyways, did you want to respond to that?
Well, no. I think you had some tips or pointers you wanted to mention, Jolly. So if you want to speak up about those.
I missed the first part of the debate, so I don't know exactly what Snake's whole background is. I don't think 60 years is quite long enough for something to be considered feasible, especially considering the amount of people that died during those 60 years.
Interesting.
So I'm not quite sure there. I mean, I would say something's feasible to the point where it doesn't explode and kill a whole bunch of its own people every time the government collapses. I mean, there are peaceful transitions of government that, things don't have to completely eat themselves alive like, communist regimes do. You're a socialist. Did you bring up Venezuela?
Just to reiterate, I don't know if you were here, Jolly. I am not a Marxist. I'm not even a socialist. I was sort of playing devil's advocate here. So, I mean, you do bring up a good point, though, about, like a lot of people dying or... I'm kind of surprised that you think 60 years is not feasible. But, again, I tried to stay as far away from those subjects as I could just because I wanted to really reel it back into the debate. But, yeah, if Mathoma had really pressed me, I guess he did press me on, how long something had to be feasible. Perhaps it would have made me look even weaker. That's a good point.
No, I do know you're playing devil's advocate. Todd told me before I joined, so I know that was going on. No, I mean, I don't know, the whole feasible thing. I mean, it just seems to me like 60 years is. I mean, even was it really 60 years? And I mean, it wasn't like an organic thing. The other thing that I don't know, no one ever touches on is like, how come communist, Marxist, whatever societies can't like build themselves up? Why do they always need a capitalist society to build it up first?
I mean, there's
You
an
know.
obvious answer, but we.
No, we would all agree with you on that, Jolly. But that's not really the point of the. That wasn't necessarily the point of the debate. Actually, one thing
No,
I do
I
want to
know.
bring.
I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
no one ever brings that kind of stuff up. So
Sure.
But what were you saying, Todd?
There was one thing I wanted to ask Mathoma though. I'm actually surprised though, Mathoma. There's one thing you didn't bring up that might have made your case a little bit stronger, was when you were talking about feasibility. You could have argued about the whole efficiency problem of property. Well, no, actually, no, not necessarily efficiency, but with private property. I mean, how would you actually, I think maybe you did bring it up. How would you run a society without private property? Did you bring that up with I don't quite remember.
I guess I tried to press Snake on that issue a little, because it seems to me that the mechanisms by which you would have to have some sort of personal possessions, because like the Marxists, they want this distinction between personal possession and private property, to make everything merely personal possession, but you're not allowed to employ people, you're not allowed to make money, you're not allowed to profit off of things. I was preempting some of the answers you might have, like a police state, or just abolishing money. I mean, I thought he might go down that road to say, okay, we're going to ban money. I guess I didn't really get any answers as to how you would actually maintain a situation in which you're not allowed to use your property to make any sort of money or employ people.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Snake?
Yeah, I mean, both now and earlier, you also brought up you were expecting me to. I think you were expecting me to talk about propaganda and how, like, the consciousness of the people would move in this direction, in addition to, implementing it through a police state or whatnot. And to be honest, I mean, this is one of the cases where, whether you think my decision to avoid those topics was perhaps a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, I think, honestly, ignorance is bliss in this case, because I do not know the history behind these various states and the systems down pat. I'm really not qualified to get into that. I could have, tried to research it all within a couple days, but I figured it would be stronger for me to stick to what I know best and to try to argue the logic rather than bring up historical examples. I do regret not bringing up, I believe it's called the Kibbutz, a libertarian socialism society that did exist, but
Is that in Israel?
It's in Israel.
Yeah. But again, I didn't know it well enough, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stick to the point, and I don't know, it's up to you to decide whether you think that was a good idea or not, I guess.
I think one thing that we've learned is, especially when you're defending a position that you're not familiar with and actually disagree with, try to study as much about the position as a whole first. Because once you study the position as a whole, even when you deal with one specific, because all the elements ultimately in an ideology hang together, right? So even if the other elements of the ideology aren't up for debate, knowing the entire ideology rather well does help you anticipate some of these other points. And I think that's one thing that we learn from this, is that reading or understanding this ideology, and with a certain measure of detail, does allow you to have more flexibility in responding to these things. Did you have a point, Jolly?
Yeah, something that Snake was actually pretty convincing even after I knew he was a devil's advocate, because he said a lot of stuff that was that I just see a lot of leftists saying a lot. And one of the things he was saying is like, "Oh, I'm not going to defend Marx," or something like that. And I think, like, man, like, if I had a penny for every time a leftist said that in a debate, like, I'm not going to defend some guy who I'm aligned with.
I swear, guys, I'm not a Marxist.
The problem is, like, that's something that leftists do a lot, is they don't get pinned down on a lot of issues. And it's a weakness that our side has, is we don't pin them down as well as we could. The other thing is, in general, with like, well, most people who debate, but I think especially with like leftist positions, Marxism and stuff like that, their greatest weakness is explaining their ideology and what they want, because usually they don't know it that well, and really at the heart of it, it's already like pretty much been disproven to not work when it interacts with reality. So I think in the general rule of debates, anyways, is if you're explaining, you're losing. So I think we need to press that issue more.
Yeah, I think Mathoma tried to press the explanation part, but I think we're probably finished with the AAR unless anybody has anything else they want to say.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you definitely, Mathoma, you really brought a good angle there, and I was really stressed out about halfway through when you were pushing certain things, and so yeah, good job, man.
Well, I'll certainly return the favor and say I was quite stressed out when you kind of demoted your conception of feasibility to just, okay, the state's going to be gone for some period of time, and then, you know, in that short period of time, we're not going to enforce private property rights. And then, I mean, I was kind of worried too how I was going to come back against that, because I don't want to concede the debate resolution. Say,
I'm sure I'm sure the anarcho-capitalist will want to hang me for what I've said, that you need a state to enforce property norms, but I thought it was the strongest. Yeah. What do you say?
Oh, I said that's one thing that threw me off too. Kind of whether property exists tangibly or whether that tangible existence is somehow you need the state to enforce the right for the actual relation to exist. Because my conception of property was that it's totally tangible things. Like, I mean, you ask them what is private property? It's like, you know, things like a car, like your example of a garden, like things you can use for, you know, production. You can simply employ others. So I mean, that's one thing that threw me off too. Like that you needed the state to enforce the right for the property to actually exist in itself.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that you do. I mean, I wasn't just lying or something, but I would say that if you wanted to really tear my argument apart, you should have maybe gone the anarcho-capitalist route and said, what do you mean you don't need a state to enforce it? If you have a private, you know, I don't know, mercenary company, then you could enforce it without a state. You could have gone an oddball direction, and I think you might have deflated my entire core there.
What was the weakest point in Mathoma's argument?
Oh,
Or his whole arguing strategy?
I actually think the weakest link was focusing on temporality. It was both strong and weak, because the comeback that Snake had was, well, everything fails in the end, so how much time are we talking about? Because I think that the objection could have been more powerful if Mathoma had given more forethought into what would be the minimum amount of time that would need to elapse for something to be feasible.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if he gave an amount of time, that might have like cut my line of argument in half right there.
Well, because what you do, because the way you responded, real quick, the way you responded was the way it was proper, Snake. You said, well, everything in the end fails, so then everything is unfeasible. So you have to make that argument stick. You need to have some sort of meaningful amount of time that you both agree on, and then you could then use that as an effective measurement.
I would say probably past, like, I don't know. A safe bet is to say after the founders of the institution are, like, you know, dead. I don't even think all the founders were dead when communism was collapsing, was it?
Oh, yeah, they were dead. The Leninist generation was all dead. Now, even the Stalinist generation, well, many were killed by Stalin, but even those that weren't, most of them were not long for this world either.
They're kind of all old guys when they got in there anyway, so I don't know. But, I don't know, 60 years. I don't know. Well, the thing is, like, I don't think it's hard to have a qualifier of time, because, like, 60 years isn't that long. But then when you look at the United States, what it's been its own government for 200, and I don't consider that
a long time. Yeah.
No, and like you can't use the United States as an example because of the Civil War, in my opinion. So really, you got to half that, you know, timeline. It really has to be like a stable government. I'm not sure really what kind of timeline you'd have to say. How much amount of time makes something legitimate. So
Well, yeah, like with the Civil War, right? The government the founders set up only lasted 80 years. After that, we got a new government under Lincoln, so it's not very long-lasting government.
Just don't tell mainstream liberals and conservatives that though.
uh-oh. Wait a
Yeah,
minute. We're not helping ourselves out here. We're just coming up with arguments to beat us. I don't know.
That's true.
Point of the stream, it's been flipped on us.
Yeah.
that's
Maybe
right.
you really are a Marxist, Snake. Maybe you really are.
No. Don't throw me out of a helicopter, please.
We'll give you a parachute when we do it.
Oh well.
But I think we've probably covered the bases here. So
Yeah.
thanks
Masama
guys
wanted
for
to say
showing up for the
something.
AR. This is Todd Lewis signing off.
Yeah, fuck